Episode 1. The Last Breath. The First Awakening. The pain was the last thing she remembered. Not memories, not flashes of her life, not regrets. Only pain. Sharp, blinding pain as steel pierced her chest. And then coldness swallowing her whole. She had heard the judge's voice condemning her, calling her traitor. She had felt the eyes of the court watching, and she had seen the Duke, her husband, looking down at her, expression calm and distant. In his eyes there was no love, no sorrow, no hatred, only duty. Her final breath escaped her, and she died. And then she woke. She inhaled sharply, eyes flying open to sunlight, not darkness. Birds sang outside the window. The scent of spring blossoms drifted into the room. Seraphina touched her chest. Smooth skin. No wound, no scar. She looked around and realized where she was. This room. She had not seen it for 3 years. She whispered to herself that this was the spring quarter before the engagement. She had gone back 3 years into the past. The door opened, and a young maid stepped in cheerfully. "My lady, you're awake. The head seamstress is already here for your engagement gown fitting." Seraphina froze. The engagement gown. The gown she had worn when she was promised to Calum Ravenscar, the Duke of the North, the beginning of her undoing. Not this time. She dressed in a simple ivory gown, not her usual loud silk or flamboyant colors. She examined herself in the mirror, calm eyes, steady expression, the face of someone who had looked death in the eyes, and returned. She walked through the corridor while servants whispered behind hands about the vain, proud Lady Seraphina. But their opinions no longer mattered. She knew the truth of what was coming, and her goal was now survival. At breakfast, her father sat at the head of the table, stern and proud, his gaze like polished steel. Her stepmother smiled with practiced sweetness, while her younger brother Adrian read quietly beside them. Her father spoke of her traveling north for the engagement. Her stepmother teased about her becoming the Duchess of the Frozen Lands. Seraphina calmly asked her father why he arranged this match. Annoyed, he replied bluntly that it strengthened political foothold. He told her she would act as silent and obedient support. Seraphina smiled quietly. To him she was never a daughter, only a means to power. But this time she would not play that role blindly. Later she found Adrian in the courtyard, reading beneath an arch of vines. He looked up and observed that she looked different, calmer. She knelt beside him and asked that if she left and things became difficult, he would write to her. He looked confused, asking why things would become difficult. She only answered that it was a feeling. She could not tell him the truth, that in the original life their father had used Adrian, and the boy died young. This time she would not allow that. That night in her chamber by candlelight, she began to write, not a letter of romance, but a plan. Step 1, speak to the Duke before the engagement. Step 2, propose terms, not affection. Step 3, make herself indispensable to the North. Step 4, avoid the winter framing. Step 5, protect Adrian. She wrote the final line with steady resolve. I will survive. 2 days later, she traveled north with only 2 attendants. No parade, no spectacle. Her arrival would be quiet, controlled. Snow began to fall lightly. The sky turned steel gray as they approached the mountain fortress. Cold, towering stone rising above a frozen world. The Duke's castle. Upon entering the great hall, she saw Calum Ravenscar waiting. Tall, broad, severe, with eyes like a storm trapped under ice. In the past, she would have bowed too deeply and smiled too brightly, desperate for approval. Not this time. She greeted him with measured dignity. He studied her closely, expecting vanity, but instead finding composure and clarity. She spoke first. Before official engagement proceedings, she wished to make a proposal. The room grew still. She stated that this marriage was political, not romantic, and she proposed terms. She would support his rule, manage relations, assist the estate, and serve the North. In return, He would ensure her safety, grant her autonomy, and treat her as a partner rather than a possession. The hall was utterly silent. The Duke stepped forward and studied her deeply, perhaps searching for the spoiled noblewoman he had expected. He did not find her. He asked what would happen if he refused her terms, and she answered simply that she would not marry him. Shock rippled through the hall. No one refused a duke. He murmured that she was either very clever or very foolish. She replied that she was honest. Finally, he told her to put her terms into writing, and he would consider them. It was not agreement. It was not rejection. It was engagement. And for Seraphina, that was enough. Later in her private chamber, she reflected on her previous life, where she had begged for affection, fought for attention, and died unloved. This time she would not fight for love. She would fight for life. In the first timeline, the Duke's proposal had defined her fate. In this one, the proposal belonged to her. Eleonora.
Hello.
Her mother's voice floated from the hallway before the door opened. Lady Margaret Ravenshaw stepped into the room with the calm grace she always carried, though today there was a stiffness in her shoulders that Nora noticed at once. Nora set her brush down carefully and rose. "Mama, good morning. I was just—" She gestured to her painting with a small smile, trying to capture the bluebells before they wilt. Her mother attempted to smile back, but it did not quite reach her eyes. In her hand, she held a single envelope, thick and cream-colored, sealed with a deep red wax. The sight of it, so official and solemn, made Nora's own smile falter. "From the Winthorpe estate," Lady Margaret said quietly. "It arrived not 5 minutes ago." The name Winthorpe had a certain weight in Edelmere. Winthorpe Manor was older than Ravenshaw House, older even than the town of Edelmere itself, some said. Its family, the Winthorpes, were well known for their influence at court, their long history of service to the crown, their lands, and their careful, somewhat distant reputation. Nora felt a flutter in her chest. "The Winthorpe estate? For us?" Her mother nodded, stepping closer. "Addressed to your father, but he has asked that we open it together." Together. That word nestled itself in Nora's thoughts with a quiet unease. Lady Margaret crossed the room and set the envelope gently upon the desk, beside Nora's paints. Up close, Nora could see the wax seal, a shield bearing a stylized hawk, wings spread, with a narrow river engraved beneath it, the Winthorpe crest. "Your father is in his study," Lady Margaret continued, smoothing an invisible crease in her skirt. "He thought it best that you be there when it is read." "Me?" Nora's voice came out softer than she intended. Her mother's eyes lingered on her, searching. Lady Margaret Ravenshaw was not a woman given to dramatics. The lines at the corners of her eyes came more from worry than from laughter. Today those lines seemed a little deeper. "Nora," she said gently, "you are nearly 20. There are matters that concern you directly now." Nora's fingers curled slightly into the fabric of her dress. Some part of her had always known this day, or at least a day like it, would come. Young women of her station did not stay in their father's house forever. Still, knowing something and standing face to face with it were very different things. "Is it—" Nora began, then stopped. Her throat felt too tight. Her mother understood nonetheless. "We do not know yet," she said, "but the Winthorpes do not send letters without purpose." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The morning light shifted across the desk, touching the envelope and making its wax seal gleam. Nora drew in a steadying breath. "Very well, Mama. Let us go." Her father's study was one of the grander rooms of Ravenshaw House, though the Ravenshaws rarely entertained visitors important enough to require such grandeur. Tall shelves lined the walls, full of books bound in worn leather, their gilt titles faded by time. A large oak desk stood near the window, its surface tidy but clearly used. A quill, resting in an inkpot, a stack of neatly organized papers, a small silver clock ticking softly. Sir Edmund Ravenshaw stood behind the desk, one hand braced on its surface as though it were holding him upright. His hair, once as dark as Nora's, had grown more grey in recent years, and his face bore the quiet strain of a man who spent too many evenings in thought. "Margaret. Nora." His voice warmed as they entered, though his eyes flicked almost immediately to the envelope in Lady Margaret's hand. Nora curtsied out of habit, then stepped forward, her gaze moving from her father to the polished floor and back again. "You wished me to be here, Papa?" "Yes," he said. "Come, both of you. Sit." The three of them took their places, Lady Margaret on the chair nearest the desk, Nora beside her, and Sir Edmund returning to his own seat. He reached for the envelope, his fingers resting on the wax for a moment before he broke the seal with a controlled motion. The crack of the wax sounded loud in the quiet room. He unfolded the parchment within and began to read. His eyes moved slowly, lips tightening just slightly at the corners. Nora watched, her heartbeat turning into a faint rushing in her ears. At last he exhaled. "It is as we thought." Lady Margaret's hand found Nora's, fingers curling around her daughter's. "From Lord Winthorpe?" Sir Edmund nodded. "From the Marquis himself, yes. He writes regarding his son." Nora's breath caught. Lord Adrian? She knew of him only from stories, as one knew of distant stars, present, but far above the concerns of her own sky. He was rumored to be reserved, attentive to his duties, more inclined to quiet observation than to charm. There had been no scandals attached to his name, no whispers of extravagant behavior. If anything, people spoke of him as though he were carved from the same stone as Winthorpe Manor itself, solid, dignified, a little cold. Sir Edmund cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "To Sir Edmund Ravenshaw, Marquis of Winthorpe, sends his warmest regards and sincere respect. It is with careful consideration and earnest intent that I write to propose a union between our houses through the marriage of my son and heir, Lord Adrian Winthorpe, to your daughter, Lady Eleonora Ravenshaw." The words fell into the quiet like small stones into still water. Marriage. The room seemed to grow smaller around Nora, the shelves closing in, the ticking of the clock suddenly much too loud. Her mind did not race so much as pause, caught between one breath and the next. Her father continued reading, about the honor of their families, the compatibility of their stations, the desire to strengthen bonds within the kingdom. He read of Lord Adrian's character, described in phrases that were carefully respectful but not overly warm, diligent, principled, of upright temperament. There was a note, too, of practicality. The letter mentioned the Ravenshaw estate, their long-standing history, their loyalty to the crown, and without stating it plainly, hinted that the Winthorpes were well aware of the Ravenshaws' recent financial strain. When Sir Edmund finished, the words seemed to linger in the air, echoing in Nora's mind. "Propose a union," she murmured, almost to herself. Sir Edmund folded the letter again, setting it down with care. His gaze moved from the parchment to his daughter, and whatever strict composure he might have intended softened at the sight of her. "Nora," he said, his voice quieter now, "we have known that circumstances would soon press us to consider such matters." Nora swallowed. "Because of our finances." Her father's jaw tightened just barely. "The harvests have not been kind. The investments I made in the mill did not prosper as I hoped. We have not yet reached the point of true danger, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words. "We must be cautious and open to opportunities." Nora glanced at her mother, whose eyes shone with a mixture of concern and love. "I do not wish you to think," Lady Margaret said, "that we would trade your future for comfort, Eleonora. You are not a ledger to be balanced. You must know this." "I do," Nora said softly. And she did. She had never once doubted her parents' love, yet love did not erase the reality of the world they lived in. "Then you must also know," Sir Edmund added, "that this proposal, at least as an invitation to consider, comes not from desperation, but from fortune. The Winthorpes are honorable. The Marquis has a reputation for fairness. Lord Adrian has never been spoken of with cruelty. If he is reserved, I would rather that than a man whose name is forever on others' tongues for the wrong reasons." Nora looked down at her hands, still held by her mother's. Her fingers were slender, ink-stained from writing letters and paint-stained from hours spent at her desk. "What exactly is the proposal?" she asked. Sir Edmund picked up the letter again, scanning quickly. "They do not insist upon a formal betrothal at once. The Marquis suggests that we bring you to Winthorpe Manor for a stay of several days. You would be introduced to the family, spend time in their company, and at the end of that, both parties may speak honestly. If there is agreement, a betrothal will be announced. If not, the matter will be quietly forgotten." Nora blinked. Somehow, that felt both reassuring and more daunting. A meeting. Days spent under the gaze of strangers, with the unspoken question of, is she suitable? Hanging in every moment. Lady Margaret squeezed her hand. "You would not be alone. Your father and I would accompany you for the initial visit, though the Marquis writes that he wishes you and Lord Adrian to have time to converse privately. Within propriety, of course." "Of course," Nora said faintly. Silence settled again, padded and heavy. In that silence, Nora's thoughts slipped away from the study, back to the morning parlor, to the watercolor bluebells on her desk. She had always imagined her future in soft, indistinct shapes. Marriage as something gentle and distant, perhaps to a kind man in the countryside, someone who would not mind if she spent afternoons painting or walking in the fields. Children, perhaps, years from now. A peaceful life without much fuss. She had not imagined this, the weight of a great estate, the careful eyes of high society, the unspoken expectation that every gesture might someday be observed, measured, judged. "May I think?" she asked quietly. Sir Edmund and Lady Margaret exchanged a quick glance, and whatever anxiety lay between them was masked by understanding. "Of course, my dear Tsalkosai," her mother said. "We do not require an answer this moment." "However, Sir Edmund added gently, the Marquis requests a reply within a week. Their household is orderly. Plans must be made. Guests accommodated." Nora nodded slowly. A week. 7 days to decide whether she would step into a life that might change everything she knew. She rose, smoothing her skirts automatically. "If you will excuse me," she said, her voice polite but slightly distant even to her own ears. "I believe I shall go to the gardens for a while." Her father stood as well, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Whatever you decide, Nora, we will stand beside you." Lady Margaret stood and wrapped her arms around her daughter. It was a gentle embrace, and yet Nora could feel the faint tremble in her mother's fingers. "I trust your heart," her mother whispered. "It has never led you falsely." Nora left the study with the echo of those words in her ears. The garden paths were familiar beneath her steps, the gravel crunching softly as she walked. Ravenshore's grounds were not vast, but they were tended with care. Hedges trimmed neatly, rose bushes pruned, beds of lavender rolling like a purple breeze beside the stone walls. Nora did not walk with any particular destination in mind, only with a desire to be somewhere quiet where the sky felt larger than the confines of a room. She passed the rose arbors, their blossoms still heavy with dew. She brushed one gently with her fingertips, inhaling its soft scent. The world continued as it always had, bees drifting from flower to flower, a distant bird calling, the wind stirring leaves into a gentle rustle. And yet everything felt different. She found herself at her favorite spot, a small bench beneath an old oak tree, slightly worn but sturdy. From here she could see the fields stretching away behind the house, patchwork squares of cultivated land and wild meadow. The horizon seemed far enough away to hold all her worries without complaint. Nora sank down onto the bench and folded her hands in her lap. For a while she simply sat, listening to her own breathing, feeling the rise and fall of her chest. Lord Adrian Winthrop, she murmured, testing the name on her tongue. It felt foreign there, like a word from a language she didn't yet know. She tried to imagine him, a faceless gentleman in a tailored coat, standing in the garden of a great manor, eyes cool but not unkind. Was he tall? Did he smile easily? Or not at all? Did he like books, music, the quiet of the countryside? Did he enjoy the same sky she was looking at now? It was strange to think that somewhere, perhaps at this very moment, he might be speaking her name aloud for the first time. Eleanora Ravenshaw, he might be saying, reading the letter his father had shown him. What image would her name conjure in his mind? A stiff, proper lady? A shy country girl? Someone unremarkable? She traced a small circle on her skirt with her thumb. Marriage. Of course she had thought of it before. What girl her age had not? But she had thought of it in soft daydreams, not as a proposal written in her father's study with wax and ink and the weight of necessity. She had imagined being chosen because someone had come to know her, truly know her, her quiet love of painting, her fondness for children, her habit of humming when she thought she was alone. Now the choice came first. The knowing would have to follow, if it came at all. And yet, she whispered to herself, is that not also a kind of story? To meet as strangers and learn to be not strangers? The idea did not entirely frighten her. There was something steadying in it. Life rarely unfolded according to the tales written in books, but perhaps there was a different sort of beauty in journeys that began plainly, with letters and uncertainty and hesitant steps. She thought of her younger siblings, Isabel, only 14, still prone to running down the hallway when she was excited, Thomas, 11, forever with ink on his fingers from the adventure stories he tried to write himself. They did not yet know the particulars of the family's finances, but they had begun to notice little things. Fewer new dresses for Isabel, less sugar at table, her father's quiet sighs when he thought no one was listening. If her choice could ease those worries, if it could secure their future and keep Ravenshaw from falling into disrepair, did that not matter too? She did not want to be the heroine of a tragic play, sacrificing everything for duty, without joy. But she also did not want to cling to a dream so tightly that she lost sight of the needs of those she loved. "What do you think?" she asked the oak tree softly, as she had done since childhood. The tree, unsurprisingly, did not answer. Its leaves whispered above her, the breeze threading through them like a sigh. Nora smiled faintly at herself. Perhaps the answer would not come from a tree or a book or a dream. Perhaps it would come simply from a quiet line she drew in her heart. I will walk forward, and if the path is kind, I will be grateful. If it is not, I will still be myself. She lifted her face to the sky. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal a stretch of clear blue. I will go, she said, softly but firmly. Saying the words out loud made them real. I will go to Winthrop Manor. I will meet Lord Adrian, and I will decide with open eyes. Her heart gave a small, nervous flutter, but beneath it there was a thread of steadiness. Having decided, she sat a little straighter. The day seemed no less bright than before. Somewhere in the house, the clock in her father's study chimed the hour. Life, it seemed, continued. Only now it carried her along a little more quickly. The decision once spoken cast a new light on the week that followed. Preparations began at once, though not with the frantic energy of a grand ball. It was a quieter sort of busyness. Letters exchanged, trunks brought down from attics and aired out, a seamstress summoned to make modest adjustments to dresses that had been worn many times, but could be refreshed with careful stitching. Nora found herself at the center of it all in a way she was not accustomed to. She had always been present, of course, in the life of the household, but now every glance seemed to measure her differently. At breakfast, Isabel watched her with round eyes. "Will Winthrop Manor be bigger than Ravenshaw?" she asked between bites of toast. "I imagine so," Nora replied, buttering her own bread carefully. "They have more land and more responsibilities." "Do you think they have swans?" Thomas piped up. "I read in a book that great houses often do, on lakes, with lilies." Nora's lips curved. "If they do, you must tell me how many when I return." "If you return," Thomas said dramatically, only to blanch when his mother gave him a look. "Thomas," Lady Margaret said sternly, though there was faint amusement in her eyes, "your sister is not going to battle." "In a way, she is," Thomas muttered into his cup. Nora laughed softly, the sound easing some of the tension in the room. "I promise, Thomas, if there are dragons in the Winthorpe Gardens, I shall be most careful." Her father shook his head, though there was warmth in his expression as he watched his children. "The Winthorpes do not keep dragons," he said, "only very orderly horses and an alarming number of ledgers." "How do you know?" Isabel asked. "I have visited. Long ago," Sir Edmund replied, "before any of you were born. It is a fine estate, stately, a touch severe, perhaps, but solid, like its master." "Like Lord Adrian?" Isabel's voice grew more curious. Sir Edmund hesitated. "Lord Adrian was a boy when I saw him last, quiet, polite. I have heard since that he is much the same as a man, only with greater responsibilities." Nora listened, filing away the small pieces of information as though they were colors on a palette. Quiet, polite, responsible. She could work with that. Later in her room she stood before the mirror while Marie, her lady's maid, helped style her hair. The glass reflected a young woman with dark hair, deep brown eyes, and a complexion that the sun touched easily if she wasn't careful. She was not striking in the way some women were. No shining golden curls, no eyes the color of rare gemstones, but she had been told she had a gentle prettiness. She did not mind being gentle. "Do you think I look terribly serious?" Nora asked, as Marie pinned a strand of hair into place. Marie smiled faintly in the mirror. "My lady always looks thoughtful. It suits you." "Thoughtful," Nora repeated. "Is that another way of saying I look worried?" "Sometimes," Marie admitted, "but not now. You look as though you are thinking about more than anyone can see." Nora considered that, then gave a small nod. "Perhaps I am." She thought of Winthorpe Manor again, rooms larger than any at Ravenshaw, hallways lined with paintings of ancestors whose names she did not know. She wondered whether Lord Adrian ever felt lost in such a place, whether he ever looked at those portraits and felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on his shoulders. If he did, she hoped he had somewhere quiet to sit, the way she had her morning parlor. "Nora," came her mother's voice from the doorway. "May I come in?" "Of course, Mamma," Nora replied. Lady Margaret entered, closing the door gently behind her. She paused a moment, taking in the sight of her daughter by the mirror, her hair half-styled, her expression caught on the border between girlhood and something more. "You look very pretty," Lady Margaret said, moving closer. "Winthorpe will not know what to do with you." Nora laughed quietly. "I suspect they will manage, Mamma. They seem rather good at managing." Her mother reached out and brushed a stray curl back from her face. "How are you feeling?" Nora considered the question. "A little like a letter in transit. Not yet where I am going, but no longer where I was." Lady Margaret's lips curved. Ever poetic. "It is only, once we arrive, everything will be different," Nora said. "Not necessarily worse, perhaps not better. Just different." "Yes," her mother agreed. "But remember, Nora, different is not always to be feared. Sometimes it is simply new." Nora looked at their reflection together. Herself, younger, uncertain but growing steadier. Her mother, older, wiser, with a gentleness that had weathered storms without hardening. "Did you feel like this?" Nora asked softly. "When you married Papa?" Lady Margaret's gaze drifted, as though looking back through years. "In some ways, yes. I did not know your father very well when we wed. We had met, of course, at gatherings and dinners, but the heart of a person is not easily read across a ballroom." "How did you decide?" Nora asked. Her mother smiled thoughtfully. I watched how he spoke to people who could give him nothing. The servants, the old gardener, your Aunt Clara's shy friend whose dress was always a little outdated. He was kind, quietly so. That was enough for me to say, I will take the risk of learning him more closely. And were you frightened? A little, Lady Margaret admitted. But I was also hopeful. Marriage is not a promise of perfection, Nora. It is a promise that two imperfect people will try every day to build something worthy together. Love sometimes comes first, sometimes it comes later. Both are stories worth living. Nora absorbed these words slowly. What if I do not like him, or he does not like me? Then we will not bind you to him, her mother replied, her voice firm. We have agreed on this, your father and I. This visit is to discover, not to trap. You will be polite, honest, yourself. If at the end of it your heart says no, we will accept that. Even if it disappoints our hopes for security, we will not trade your peace. Nora's eyes stung suddenly, and she blinked quickly. Thank you, she whispered. Lady Margaret pressed a kiss to her forehead. But perhaps, my dear, your heart will not say no. Perhaps it will say, let us see. And that, too, is a kind of beginning. The day of departure dawned gray but not unfriendly, the sky covered in soft clouds that promised neither rain nor bright sun. The carriage was brought around to the front of the house, its black paint polished, the Ravenshaw crest shining faintly on the door. Trunks had been packed carefully and strapped to the back. Marie fussed over last-minute items, ensuring that Nora's shawl was folded just so, that her small sketchbook was safely tucked into her travel bag, that she had a handkerchief in case of dust or tears. Sir Edmund stood near the carriage, speaking to the driver, while Thomas and Isabel hovered nearby, both excited and subdued. You will write? Isabel asked, clutching Nora's hand. Of course, Nora promised. I shall write the first evening if I can, and I shall describe everything, even the swans. If there are none, you must invent them, Thomas insisted. For my sake, Nora smiled. Very well. If there are no swans, I shall sketch you a whole lake of them. Lady Margaret joined them, adjusting Nora's bonnet with the practiced touch of a mother who had done the same countless times since her daughter was a child. Remember to rest when you can, she instructed softly, and eat, even if your stomach feels too full of thoughts. I will, Nora said. Her father approached, tucking a folded paper into his pocket. The letter of reply to the Marquis, now sent days ago, had been graciously accepted. Only a confirmation had followed, stating the day and hour when Winthorpe Manor expected their arrival. Well then, Sir Edmund said, his voice steady but warm, shall we? As Nora placed her foot on the carriage step, she paused and turned back to look at Ravenshaw House. The familiar stone walls, the ivy trailing along the sides, the windows of the morning parlor where her paint still waited. For a moment her heart squeezed. This was the only home she had ever known. She took a slow breath and let it out. I will come back, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Whether she came back as Lady Eleanora Ravenshaw or as something else entirely, she could not yet know. But she would return. She climbed into the carriage, settling onto the cushioned seat beside her mother. Her father joined them, the door closing with a solid thud. Outside, Marie, Isabel, and Thomas stepped back, and with a flick of the reins, the carriage began to roll forward. As the house receded from view, Nora watched until the last glimpse of grey stone disappeared behind the trees lining the drive. The road to Winthorpe was not long in miles, but it felt like a stretch of time unto itself. The carriage wheels hummed over packed earth and cobblestone, the rhythm gentle enough to lull, but Nora's thoughts were too alive for sleep. Fields rolled by, green and gold, dotted with grazing sheep. Small cottages stood at the edges of the road, smoke curling from their chimneys. Children waved as the carriage passed, and Nora lifted her hand in a small reflexive reply, though they could not see her face clearly behind the window's glass. Her mother occupied herself with some needlework, the quiet sound of the thread pulling through fabric like a soft whisper. Her father pretended to read a folded newspaper, though Nora noticed his gaze wandering to the window often. For long stretches, nobody spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was simply full of thoughts, of hopes, of worries. None of them quite knew how to put into words. Eventually, Lady Margaret set her needlepoint aside and touched Nora's arm lightly. "Would you like some water, dear?" "Yes, thank you," Nora said. As she sipped from the small flask, she caught her reflection in the carriage window, her face layered over the passing scenery. She looked, not exactly different, but somehow more aware of herself, as though she had been cast in a role she did not yet know how to play. "What do you imagine him to be like?" she asked suddenly, surprising even herself with the question. "Lord Adrian?" her father asked. "Yes." Her parents exchanged a look. "I imagine," Sir Edmund said cautiously, "that he feels the weight of expectation keenly. To be the heir of such a house is no small burden." "I imagine," Lady Margaret added, "that he has not had many people in his life who encourage him to simply be rather than to perform. Great houses often create great loneliness in their way." Nora absorbed this quietly. If he was lonely, perhaps she would see it. She had always been good in her small world at noticing the expressions others tried to hide. "And you," her mother asked gently, "what do you imagine?" Nora considered. "I imagine a man who stands very straight in rooms full of other people, who speaks when it is required and listens when it is wise. I imagine hands that have not done much field work but are not entirely unused to effort." Her father gave a small huff of amusement. "You imagine his hands?" "One can tell a great deal about a person from their hands," Nora said, a little embarrassed but sincere. "Whether they fidget, whether they grip, whether they rest or tense, it tells you how comfortable they are with the world around them." Lady Margaret's eyes softened. "Then perhaps, when you meet him, you will look at his hands and know whether there is kindness in him." "I hope so," Nora said softly. "I very much hope so." As the hours passed, the landscape began to change. The fields gave way to more wooded areas, the trees growing taller and more closely clustered. The road curved more often, the carriage swaying gently with each turn. Nora felt her heartbeat quicken in an odd mixture of anticipation and nerves. She glanced at her parents. They both seemed to sense the shift as well. This closer country was Winthorpe's domain. When the carriage rounded a final bend, the trees parted, and there it was, Winthorpe Manor. It stood upon a gentle rise, its stone a shade paler than Ravenshore's, with tall, symmetrical windows and a broad set of steps leading up to a grand entrance. Wings extended on either side, embracing a vast front lawn shaped by careful landscaping, hedges sculpted into precise lines, flower beds arranged in patterns visible even from a distance. A long drive curved in a graceful arc toward the front steps, lined with neatly trimmed trees. A fountain stood at the center of the circular approach, its water catching the light in a shimmer as it spilled from tier to tier. Nora's breath caught. "It is beautiful," she murmured. "Imposing, I would say," her father corrected gently. "But then, beauty and imposition often share a border." Nora could not disagree. Winthorpe felt like something out of a storybook, but not one of her soft watercolor tales. It was chiseled, precise, written in ink rather than paint. As the carriage drew closer, she noticed figures gathered at the top of the steps, servants arrayed in respectful lines, and at the center, 3 people who were clearly family. "The Marquis and Marchioness, no doubt," Sir Edmund said under his breath. "And Lord Adrian," Nora finished quietly. Her heart began to beat in earnest, each thud a distinct sound in her chest. The carriage slowed and came to a stop. A footman stepped forward to open the door. Her father descended first, then turned and offered his hand to Lady Margaret, then to Nora. When Nora's feet touched Winthorpe's stone, it felt cooler than home, not unwelcoming, but solid in a way that made her aware of every movement. She lifted her gaze. The Marquis of Winthorpe stood at the center of the group, a tall man with silver at his temples, his posture straight, his expression composed but not cold. Beside him, the Marchioness wore a gown of deep green, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp but not unkind. And just to the Marquis's right stood a younger man, Lord Adrian Winthorpe. He was tall, as she had suspected, his shoulders broad beneath a well-tailored coat of navy blue. His hair was dark, neatly combed, and his features were regular, handsome, in a restrained way, rather than striking. His jaw was defined, his cheekbones lending a certain austerity to his face. His eyes, Nora noticed at once, were not cold. They were a deep gray blue, cool in color but not empty. They watched her with careful attention, as though she were a passage in a book he was reading for the first time and wanted very much to understand. Her pulse softened just a little at that, but what struck her most were his hands. They were currently clasped behind his back in a manner that suggested discipline, but she could see from the slight tension in his wrists that this was not his most natural posture. There was a faint ink stain near the base of his thumb, as though he had been writing not long ago. His fingers were long, not calloused like a laborer's, but there was a hint of strength in them, as though he had used them for more than signing documents. Nora exhaled slowly. "There," her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "You will look at his hands and know whether there is kindness in him." She looked up once more at his face. Lord Adrian Winthorpe inclined his head in a formal greeting, and in that brief movement his eyes met hers fully. For a heartbeat, the careful composure slipped just enough for her to glimpse something else beneath, not indifference, not arrogance, but uncertainty, as though he too stood upon unfamiliar ground. Nora's heart, which had been fluttering anxiously all morning, steadied. He is not a statue, she thought. He is a person who does not quite know how to stand in this moment either. The Marquis stepped forward, his voice carrying smoothly across the space between them. "Sir Edmund, Lady Margaret, Lady Eleonora, welcome to Winthorpe Manor." Nora curtsied, her movements practiced but sincere. As she lowered her gaze briefly, she allowed herself a small, quiet promise. "Whatever this place is, whatever this man is, I will meet them as myself." Gently, honestly, and without pretending to be made of stone. When she rose from her curtsy, the world had changed. Not in any visible way, not yet. The fountain still shimmered, the trees still lined the drive, the house still stood as it had for generations. But for Eleonora Ravenshaw, the story had moved forward, and the first chapter of her journey, from Ravenshaw's wildflowers to Winthorpe's carved stone, had truly begun.